Good afternoon. My name is Jake Lake. Been thinking for some time now that I need to share the information I have collected over the years regarding my family roots. Most people have little interest in their ancestry and know little of where their family actually came from. For whatever reason, I have had an interest in our family history all my life and I have collected a fair amount of family data. A few years ago, my daughter Kelly gave me my heritage DNA test kit as a gift. Years back I would have been very skeptical of such tests, and even now probably would have never purchased one, but since it was a gift I followed the instructions and sent in my mucus sample. My parents are both Finnish, all 4 of my grandparents are Finnish, and all 8 of my great-grandparents are Finnish, so there was no reason for me to doubt or think that I was anything but Finnish. So, how about sisu? Do you have it? Do you know where you can get it? No, it isn't a cup of coffee, although Finns do love their coffee. Not really sure where it comes from, but most Finns are just born with it. You must have heard about it, even though there really is not an English word to describe it. Sisu is a Finnish concept described as stoic determination, tenacity of purpose, grit, bravery, resilience, and hardiness, and is held by Finns themselves to express their national character. I truly believe that my grandparents and great-grandparents had it, and think you will agree with me too after hearing their story today. Sisu is in our DNA. So finally, I'm getting my act together and going to share my abbreviated edition of my family tree and lay out the collected evidence of their sisu and perhaps help my children and grandchildren gain a better understanding of their heritage and sisu as well. I was only able to trace my family roots back into the 1600s and learned that our family originated from Karvaharvi, almost dead center of Finland. And at that time, our surname was Paavo-Onanen. The family moved to Vempeli, about 50 miles west, in about 1700. Surnames back then quite often took on the name of where the family lived. My family's surname remained Pyhalahti until my grandfather Kasti Pyhalahti immigrated to the United States in 1888 and shortened his name to Lahti. His brother Heikki Pyhalahti, who came to the USA with him, changed his name to Henry Eriksson, being the son of Eric. Gus Lahti's children, including my dad, then wanting to be more American, changed their name from Lahti to Lake. So there you have it. Lake is actually the Finnish for bay. I guess they like Lake better. For the most part, I guess I'm glad my last name is not Pyhalahti or Lahti or Bay. Lake is okay with me, even though it seems I am still most often asked how to spell it.
Suot mennä itevä kalendesta, ittävä minä en luovu iävästä.
Sillä ei tätä poikoo kainous haittaa silloin, kun tanssii laijasta laitaan. Salili hipput, tupput, tapput, äppyt, tipput hiljalleen.
So, let's go back in time a bit and back to Finland. The Pyhalahtis were essentially farmers. They were also very environmentally conscious, and they highly valued their timber and left it to grow. Their children did likewise. However, others moving in over the years cut down lots of trees in the construction of their homes and such, and stirred up lots of protests. Still though, the Finns are very proud of their forests. This picture is by Heikki Sammala, who has his summer cabin on a beautiful lake in that area, and he's also the author of this Pahapavan Sukko, Finnish family ancestry book. My great-grandfather, Erik Pyhalahti, was born on March 5, 1830, in Vempeli, Finland. He is the son of Erik Pyhalahti and Lisa Savola. He married Anna Rita Mäki at the age of 21 in 1851 in Vempeli, Finland. They had 3 children together. Anna died on November 7, 1859 at the age of 28. Her youngest son, Erik Pyhalahti, had just turned 2. He then married Maria Niemi a few months later in 1860. They had 6 additional children, one of course being my grandfather, Johann Gusta. Gus for the remainder of this presentation. Maria was born on August 8, 1835 in Vempeli, Finland. She is the daughter of Heikki Multala and Lisa Jokelainen. Over the years, I have shared with my family when we were taking turns sharing something that we were thankful for at Thanksgiving. I would share that I was thankful that my great-grandfather's first wife, Anna, died at the age of 28. That was not easily understood, but you see, if she hadn't died, Erik would not have remarried, and well, quite frankly, none of us would be here today. The divorce rate in Finland today is much less than the US, but back then, in that time, it was extremely rare. So, my grandfather, Gus Pyhalahti, was born June 15, 1863, in Vempeli, Finland, to Erik and Maria. He was the second child of Maria and the 5th of Erik. He grew up in Vempeli and had dreams of immigrating to the United States since his Lutheran church confirmation in his adolescent years. My grandfather, like most Finnish immigrants then, was looking for a better way of life and to make his dreams of America a reality. It was not an easy decision, but he felt it was the right one. He left everything behind except his sisu. Life was very difficult in rural Finland during the years of 1880 to 1920, particularly for those who did not have their own land to farm, and with the new technology, changes in farming there was a reduced need for farm labor, so unemployment was incredibly high. In 1888, many young men got the harsh news, a draft notice from the Russian army. Russia Caesar Alexander III began an intense program of Russification of Finland within a real struggle with Russia. So it did not seem unreasonable for young men to look at their options. Number 1, starve. Number 2, work for long hours for meager pay. 3, join a movement to overthrow the exploiting system. 4, migrate elsewhere. Or 5, immigrate to America. Both of my grandfathers, Leander Juhala and Gus Pyhalahti, chose option number 5 and elected to say goodbye to their families and leave their homeland seeking a better way of life. So, at the age of 25, my grandpa Gus, his brothers Heikki, 22, and Jaco, or Jacob, 17, set sail out of Amsterdam to the USA aboard the SS City of Chester in May of 1888. His other siblings, Matti and Wilhelmina and Hemming, elected to remain in Finland. For most immigrants who didn't travel first or second class, the sea voyage to the United States was far from a cruise ship with lavish buffets. Such passengers survived on lukewarm soups, black bread, boiled potatoes, herring, or stringy beef. Probably not a cruise we would sign up for today. Can you even imagine the feeling they shared seeing this huge universal symbol of freedom through the fog as they were entering New York Harbor after their 40-day ordeal? The Statue of Liberty had just been unveiled on October 28, 1886, less than 2 years prior to their arrival. He and his brothers disembarked on July 14, 1888, at the port of New York Ellis Island, prior to the more modern Ellis Island of 1892, after their 40-day voyage with not much more than their sisu. From 1892 to 1924, Ellis Island was America's largest and most active immigration station, where over 12 million immigrants were processed. For the vast majority of the immigrants, Ellis Island truly was an island of hope, the first stop on their way to new opportunities and experiences in America. After processing through Ellis Island, Gus and Heikki caught a train to Red Lodge, Montana, like so many other Finnish immigrants were doing, to work in the mines there. The younger Jacob chose to settle in the Michigan area. The Finnish immigrant possessed an average of $22.67, and it took all of that and more to purchase their tickets. Montana had not even become a state yet when the two brothers arrived in the beautiful valley. Red Lodge itself had just become established in 1884. The Rocky Ford Coal Company had opened the area's first mine in 1887, and by 1891, more than 400 immigrants were digging an average of 100 tons of coal a day. Gus and Heikki immediately went to work in the mines. 50% of the miners in Red Lodge were Finnish immigrants. Their primary jobs were shoveling coal. Being a miner in the 19th century meant long hours of continuous hard labor in the dark mines with low ceiling. Accidents were frequent. The younger guys worked outside the mine to sort coal from rocks. They were not allowed underground until age 18. The breathing of coal dust caused black lung, which effects few miners knew would have on their bodies. My grandpa Juhala suffered years with that horrible disease. In 1890, the miners were paid roughly $9.06 for a 60-hour week, 10-hour days, 6 days a week, which equates to 15 cents an hour. No doubt much of their week's pay was spent at one of the 20 saloons in Red Lodge. Young Gus met a lovely young Finnish woman in 1889, Hilda Wilhelmina Koskela, who had herself immigrated from Alaharvi, Finland with her mother Maria and her 5 young siblings just 8 months before Gus came. Hilda was born on August the 10th, 1872, and was 15 years old when she came to the United States in 1887. Hilda's father, Matti Koskela, and her older brother, Johann Gustav Koskela, another Gus, came earlier to work in the mines and then sent for the rest of his family. So, I am so thankful for Red Lodge, Montana, and the coal mine that brought Gus and Hilda together, and that they fell in love and got married. Or, well, you know, I would not be telling this story. They were married there on a cold, wintry day on March 1st, 1890. The mine operators had started experimenting with new labor-saving machinery without compensating miners for lost wages, resulting in strikes and in general turmoil. Disputes between the Finns that desired their socialistic ideas and those opposed to such were springing up. I have not been able to determine what my grandfather's stand was in that regard, but in any case, the guys came to conclude that they were farmers and not coal miners. So the two families decided to move west. Their firstborn, Matthias Oscar, was born on February 3, 1891, delivered by Hilda's mother, Maria, who was a skilled midwife and delivered 10 of Hilda's 12 babies, all except for August and Edna. Oscar was born in Cold Springs, Wyoming, while en route to Oregon. They moved 800 miles west and filed homestead claims near the Greasewood Finnish settlement in Helix, Oregon, about 9 miles northwest of Pendleton. Would love to have seen pictures of that trip. That decision was no doubt a good one, as the miners continued to struggle in Red Lodge. Coal miners formed unions and became the core of the political left wing. You can no doubt see that Oregon had to be better than that. Their second child was a girl, Hilda Maria, born September 29, 1892. She was born at home and once again delivered by her grandmother. There are many Tackinons and St. Clair descendants of my Aunt Mary. Leodie Matilda was born on March 13, 1894. Unfortunately, we don't have a picture of Leodie. Leodie died on March 14, 1912, one day past her 18th birthday. Can you even imagine the pain? Hilda suffered sorrow of losing a second child, this time to pneumonia. Leodie is buried alongside her brother John in the Coskella Ranch Cemetery near Donley. Char and I visited her gravesite a few years back. Gus Lutty and Gus Coskella, along with a neighbor, Jake Habrala, were dissatisfied with the prairie country of eastern Oregon as it was nothing like their Finnish homeland. They had learned about a place in Idaho that was open to homesteading and decided to go and check it out for themselves. So the three men rode on horseback over the hills up to Long Valley, Idaho in the spring of 1895. They of course loved what they found there, and they each filed a homestead claim. Gus Lutty claimed his 160 acres that included Sugarloaf, a small hill in the valley that is a known landmark, now an island in Cascade Lake. The men returned home and prepared for the big move, but had to wait a short while for my Aunt Sophie to be born. Sophie Limby T&E Lutty was born on September the 3rd, 1895. There are many, many descendants of my Aunt Sophie Bash spread throughout Idaho and the USA. Then finally, on October the 17th, 1895, the three families started their way in covered wagons to the beautiful valley in central Idaho. Can you imagine traveling in covered wagons with a new baby over the Blue Mountains of Oregon at that time of the year? They were among the first Finnish settlers in Long Valley. Upon arrival, they quickly constructed a sauna, which would give them shelter until they would build their home. In the summer of 1897, Gus' brother Heikki Eriksson came to live with them. Gus turned the homestead over to his brother Henry and filed a new claim on adjoining land just to the east that today is known as the Gestrine Ranch. Helmi Elina was born on April the 5th, 1898, and was the first Lutty child born in Long Valley and on the homestead. Elina would later marry Otto Gestrine and birth all 7 of her children there. Those 7 would then have 23, so there are hundreds of descendants from this Gestrine marriage. Albert, being the youngest son, continued to operate the homestead until his death on March the 11th, 2021. His wife Donna continued to live there until her passing on December 31st, 2023. The homestead is now owned by her granddaughter Autumn. On April 11th, 1901, August was born. Gus went to get Hilda's mother Maria to help with the delivery, but August didn't wait for them, and somewhere between the kitchen and the bedroom, Hilda delivered him on her own and gathered him up in her apron and took care of him until the others got back. Again, there are many descendants from the August branch of the family, although most are some distance away from their original roots. Special thanks to my cousin Charlotte, who contributed so much in regards to our Lake family history. Thank you, Charlotte. A big day for the Pyhalahti family was June 15, 1903, the day that my Grandpa Gus received his naturalization certificate. He had made application for it while he was in Pendleton, and he was now a very proud U.S. citizen. It's an interesting document for sure. Nice to know that Grandpa was not an idiot, or insane, or epileptic, pauper, or beggar, or likely to become one, had no contagious diseases, was not a felon, or even have any misdemeanor involving immoral turpitude, polygamist, anarchist, never procured a prostitute, and certainly not an advocate for overturning our government and denouncing any allegiance to Russia, and in particular to Nicholas Caesar. It seems that many of our ancestors had their lives taken from them at much younger ages than in today's world. Many died as young children, and many others died prematurely. On August 28, 1904, John Edward was born. John Edward died 10 months later in 1905. There are no written records or pictures of John Edward Pyhalahti, only that he is buried next to his maternal grandparents, Maddie and Maja Koskela, in an unmarked grave on the hill at the Koskela Ranch Cemetery in Donley, Idaho. Another big day for Grandpa Gus was on March the 28th, 1906, when he received his proof of ownership for the homestead. Homestead Certificate number 2269. On May 15, 1906, Ida Amelia was born. And Ida married George Short, and they too have left their mark with numerous descendants across the states. Their youngest, Mike, in addition of being my first cousin, has also been a great friend over the years. Hilda then gave birth to another fine child, her last son, my dad, number 9. John Filbert was born on September the 12th, 1908. Was John F. a replacement for John E.? Again, I am thankful, because if John F. had not been brought into this world, I would not have been brought into this world either. His marriage to M.B. Juhala resulted in the beautifully blessed John Lake family. I shall tell you more about this story later in the presentation. Eily Wilhelmini had the special honor of being born on her mother's birthday. She was number 10, born on August 10, 1910. She married Orrin Latham in 1930, and of course we have dozens of descendants resulting from that union. Of course we all know Tish and Jane Benedict. On April the 22nd, 1912, Selma Alina, fondly known as Sally, was born on the Gestrine Ranch. Sally was a Down syndrome child, and as a baby suffered with polio. Being bedridden the last 8+ years of her life, she required total care, which, interesting enough, has a lot to do with my immediate family as well. More story to tell here. As years passed, Grandma Hilda was unable to care for Sally, and not even herself. Dad, then having the total responsibility for the care of Hilda and Sally, needed help, and so my mom-to-be moved out from South Dakota to work for Dad and help with Sally. Sally died 2 years later at the age of 28 on January the 21st, 1941, on their Jug Handle homestead. Hilda's health was failing from having so many babies, an average of one every 2 years and another on the way in just a few months. The stress of sorrow of losing Leodie and the worry and care of Sally, Grandpa Gus thought a change of scenery would be good for her. So they decided to move to Deer Island, Oregon, down the Columbia River from Portland. On March 1st, 1915, they moved there, renting a small farm and setting up a dairy. Oscar and Clara stayed at the Lake Fork homestead. Hilda's 12th and last child, Edna Batilda, was born in Deer Island on October the 21st, 1915. Uncle Dick and Aunt Edna Smith had a very interesting and exciting life together along with their 3 children, and were considerate enough to leave us with their documented life stories. And of course, they too have descendants scattered around the U.S. To supplement their income and to help out in the war effort, World War I, Grandpa Gus took a job in the Sandefjord shipyards in Vancouver. Not sure if he commuted the 40 miles there or stayed in Vancouver. At any rate, he met a young immigrant from Finland named Otto Gestrin there. As it turns out, Gus invited him home to have a good Finnish home-cooked meal. Alina must have impressed him, and so Otto and Alina were married on September the 27th, 1917 in Vancouver, and moved to the family homestead in Long Valley the following year. From that time on, it became known as the Gestrin Ranch, which I mentioned earlier. Grandpa Gus had saved up enough money to buy a place of their own in Swenson, Oregon. He rented a boxcar from Union Pacific, loaded their cattle and everything they owned in it, and moved to Swenson. That was quite the experience for the kids. My dad, John, would have been about 10 years old at that time. That was a pretty fair journey of over 300 miles by rail. Swenson was a small Finnish community about 10 miles east of Astoria. The house was a 5-bedroom house on 40 acres with lots of fruit trees and even a sauna. Dad went to elementary school there, and it was right next to them. Dad received his common school diploma, junior high, from District 22, Clatsop County School District of the state of Oregon on May the 21st, 1923, which turned out to be his last day of schooling. But even as nice as it was, it seems Long Valley was calling them. So in the spring of 1924, Grandpa purchased the Jug Handle Mountain Ranch from Mikko and Bretta Hintola. They came back to Swenson in a shiny new 1924 Model A and a 1-ton truck that Grandpa called his moving van, and used that to move them back to Idaho. The house was a small 2-story. No doubt many of you have been there at the end of what is now Hakula Lane. The house and the barn are no longer there, but the big boulders are. The barn and the other buildings were great, with a wonderful view of the mountains and once again a sauna. It was during this time that Uncle Oscar began using the surname of Lake. That followed quickly by Dad and most of the other siblings. So now we are Lake. Not so sure how official it was for them, but it is on my birth certificate. Because Hilda's health was continuing to fail and the house chores and the taking care of Sally, now totally bedridden, and to make it possible for Edna to attend college, Grandpa Gus and my dad thought it was best to hire a young woman to come live with them and do some of the work. So, Dad heard about this South Dakota girl through Carl Jarvie. Blind Carl, known by all in the valley, lived in a small log cabin in Lake Fork. His cabin is now part of a museum in Roseberry, Idaho. So anyway, Dad sends her a letter clearly stating that he is looking for a preferably Finnish girl. John desperately needed help, and Imby desperately needed a job. So here you have the first Dear John letter. Imby agreed to come from her home in South Dakota to work for a man she had never met. In addition to finding work, she found love, marriage, and a lifelong loving family. After a little time, perhaps Dad thought it was cheaper to marry Mom than to continue to pay her the agreed $8 a month. They were married on February the 1st, 1939 in Caldwell, Idaho. Of course, many stories could be told here, but that is for another time, perhaps the next generation. I shall close this brief review of my Finnish family roots and Lahti family history with just a couple of more pieces of data that will bring us up to the mid-20th century, ending this presentation with the original John Lake family tree. Grandpa Gus became very ill and was diagnosed with cancer of the bone on his lower leg. His leg was amputated on April the 10th, 1939. However, he died on November the 24th, 1939. Pretty reasonable prices at St. Alphonsus for a major surgery and a 7-day stay compared with today's hospital bills. After being bedridden for nearly 9 years, Sally died on January 23, 1941, and Grandma Hilda died on August 31, 1942. All 9 of her living children attended her memorial services at the Finn Church. Most of the family are buried here in the Finnish cemetery. Dad sold the Jug Handle Ranch to Pat Merle in 1948 and moved to the city of Lake Fork, purchasing the 160-acre farm from Jack Kangas. Alban Eld, father to the Eld boys, actually built this house. Their mother, Ella, was Jack's sister. This barn holds a lot of great memories. Even my sister Gladys has some. So, just a quick look at my Grandpa Gus family, and then a peek at the John Lake originals, and we will wrap this up.